everything that comes out of the sound design needs to complement what's happening on the game design. And you can easily feel a mismatch. Let's take, for example, the way Mario jumps, where it's a very comical, bouncy boing. It contributes to the world. It's artistic. It's, very colorful. It's very playful. But you can't see that in a more, like a Metroidvania or like a Dark Souls type game, where imagine if you're in Dark Souls and you press the jump button or the roll button, all of a sudden you hear boing. It takes you out of that experience. So it's really a marriage of artistic collaboration across the entire spectrum of art design to be able to create a cohesive sound that is complementary and contributes to the overall vision of the game.
Hello everyone, music enthusiast, and I'm really excited to have you here. As people who are interested in the music industry, we know very well the impact of music in any kind of multimedia, whether it's movies, audiobooks, or even in games where it's majorly about the players' interactivity. And here we have a variety of guests who have really different roles in the industry, whether they are composers, players in the esports, or even gamers. I'm sure we are all started as gamers, and as well as producers and game developers. I would like to give the stage to the guests to introduce themselves. We're going to start with Ariel. Please, would you introduce yourself?
It's a pleasure to be here today on the stage with you and the other esteemed guests. I'm Ariel Horn. I'm an executive producer, mostly known for esports production. I started in TV sports and evolved into esports and worked for almost 10 years at Riot Games on League of Legends.
So it's a pleasure to be here today and to witness how to involve music and game as well, or gaming as well. My name is Musab Al-Malki. I'm the founder and CEO of Boys Games. We build and publish mobile games, and we've been in the market for almost like the last seven years.
Oh, that's amazing.
I am Aslam Ghamdi, also known as Agent Whiskers. Very crazy to be able to say that name on stage with a straight face. I'm a musician, composer. I've been composing music for the large majority of my life. Started out in a very small death metal band in Saudi Arabia that ended up evolving into trying to achieve my passion in gaming and try to contribute to the growing local games industry. And I ended up composing for video games. And I've composed for multiple games and have released multiple songs. I've had 4 albums out over the past 10 years. And I'm very excited to be joining this esteemed panel.
Amazing. Yeah, it's really an honor to be here, and thank you so much to Middle Beast for bringing me out. Achilles, or Achilles in English, much easier. Similar to some, but I was a failed musician, which then just brought me over to the music industry, and I represented some big bands and got tired of touring, so then went, I'm just going to represent video gamers and streamers, and then I'll never have to leave my bedroom, which then took me to working at the leading esports data company, and I still work with a lot of the leading video game influencers for marketing campaigns for the likes of Jagex and previously Square Enix and some of the leading game developers and publishers. Yeah.
That's really amazing. As you can see, we have a very variety of guests here. I will start with a very basic question, even though we can talk about it in long paragraphs. Ariel, how do you think, or how would you describe the impact of music on storytelling and narrative?
The way I look at it is music is a universal language, and it has a way of cutting through demographics, age, and time and space, right? So in video games, just like in movies or TV programs or any type of entertainment, the sound is so important, right? And it's so important in creating a dramatic feel and the takeaway from it. And So yeah, it's been my experience that music is a key to broadening the reach as well for gaming. And so maybe later we'll talk about examples of successful projects that was able to break through certain barriers because of collaborations or projects with music and sound and gaming.
I do agree with that. But let's talk about specifically the impact of music on the gaming experience, and I would direct that question to Musab. So what is the potential of effect of including music in gaming?
So, as Earl mentioned, it's a universal language, and for sure you can share a lot of messages. And for me, it's about communicating emotions. So, emotion, feelings for the players, how to immerse them in the gameplay itself. So sometimes it can be like suspense or playful or whatever the emotional. The other thing I believe, or the other side of the thing, is how to capitalize on the moments inside the gameplay. Like you want the players to focus on that part of the story or the narrative. So it's very important to get the users or players immersed with the narrative and the story for the gameplay.
So that's in the narrative and both the narrative and gameplay. I would go into details about the music itself. So we have the different tones, the different rhythm, and that's for Isam. How would you, let's say, how different music genres, tones, and rhythm affect the gameplay itself and the narrative in games?
So I would say that video games are at the intersection of art and technology. And in order to have a cohesive vision for a video game, the artistic side needs to have great music and great sound design. It's all complementary. Everything that comes out of the sound design needs to complement what's happening on the game design. And you can easily feel a mismatch. Let's take, for example, the way Mario jumps, where it's a very comical, bouncy boing. It contributes to the world. It's artistic. It's very colorful. It's very playful. But you can't see that in a more, like a Metroidvania or like a Dark Souls type game, where imagine if you're in Dark Souls and you press the jump button or the roll button, all of a sudden you hear boing. It takes you out of that experience. So it's really a marriage of artistic collaboration across the entire spectrum of art design to be able to create a cohesive sound that is complementary and contributes to the overall vision of the game.
Okay.
Now, in terms of genres, it's the way that I frame it is, and I always, when I speak to game designers, I need to play the game. I don't need to see the trailer. I need to actually feel how the weight of the character, the moment-to-moment gameplay, the tempo, the rhythm of the character. That is what is going to dictate what style of music needs to be incorporated within this vision that the game designer has created.
Okay, that's really interesting. So basically, as a composer, does your work interfere with how you view games? I remember my brother told me I ruined games for him when I made him develop some games. So what do you think of that?
So it goes hand in hand. To be a great composer for video games, you also need to immerse yourself in the language of video games and game design, and really understand the beat to beat mechanics and how overall it feels. I'll give an example of one of my favorite composers, Mick Gordon, in Doom. I mean, when you hear a Doom soundtrack, you know what you're, or when you even see the gameplay, you know what you're getting yourself into. You cannot play a Doom game without that style, and it really, you would have to feel the weight of the game itself, or the feeling it evokes to be able to create the necessary soundscape for it. And I can't think of a better example than Mick Gordon or even the earlier Bungie games, Halo, for example. I mean, that's an earworm that has, created a generation of composers. Honestly, I mean, come on.
So who's your favorite composer of all times?
That's very difficult to say, because from my style, I didn't really look at composers besides Nobuo Uematsu,
Yes.
who is a Final Fantasy composer. Final Fantasy VII, one of my favorite soundtracks. Actually playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and the nostalgia is hitting me like a freight train. But I take my inspiration primarily from other sources. My favorite band is Radiohead, for example. So I take a lot from Radiohead's Kit A in particular. The soundscape of Kit A and Amnesiac is something that has contributed vastly, to the point where my first album is blatantly a ripoff of Radiohead. And because in my mind wasn't to create a great album, it's I want Tom York to sing on one of my songs one day. That was my North Star really at that time.
Okay, I think we can agree that Novo is our favorite. Achilles, you mentioned something related that you've been in the music industry, so you can tell us about that a little bit?
Sure. As I was trying to describe it, I mean, I started as a producer, wanting to kind of just make electronic music, and was obsessed with the likes of Burial and kind of just like, that whole movement in the late 2000s, kind of really out of the UK. And I just wasn't very good. So I think, it kind of adjacent to that, I had started a record label, as you do when you're 18.
Okay.
And I then got stuck with putting all my friends' music out. But you do these things kind of in a silo, right? And you do it for the passion of it. You just love it, especially at that time. You're not really kind of thinking of how do I commercialize this or really make a success out of it. And I think it was the third release that we had put out, and Mary had called me. Oh my God, I've just forgotten her last name. But effectively, the music supervisor for Zach Braff at the time, and it was the follow-up to Garden State, this movie Wish I Was Here. And they had asked to have one of our tracks placed in the movie, in kind of the most pivotal scene. And really, from there, it was all really a blur. It was a message that came on Bandcamp. I wasn't sure if it was even real. And then it's just, in entertainment, your life can really change overnight. And that's effectively what happened. So I then just kind of started doing everyone's administration, and became good in a way that I could have a vision for an artist and kind of work towards that to help them execute with their intentions, which is in art it can be a fleeting moment and quite nebulous to kind of try to work towards something, but I think that's the magic of having a good team behind you.
Wow, the way you went from creating music to what are you now is a really inspiring story. I think all of us started working in the gaming industry or music. We had passion, and at the same time we had our own inspiration. But there is another thing I would like to ask. You're in esports, and I would like to ask, what music often features in esports tournaments with collaborations?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we have one of the kind of iconic people that have really supported that culture here on stage today with Ariel. I think some of the work that he's put together, namely with the likes of KDA, and I'm sure has been, a part of some of the world songs, which are kind of these highlight pieces, individual pieces that come out each year to support the League of Legends World Championship. Notably this year we had Linkin Park, which is just, I mean, come on, it's the most synergetic, beautiful collaboration of cultures. And with the return of Linkin Park to, and its placement, its sync moment in Arcane and so on, it was really just a magic mesh of cultures. So I think, music in the same way that you watch a boxing fight and you have that moment of just hype, the teams are getting prepared, they're walking onto the stage, and you have the likes of Imagine Dragons and, kind of playing and capturing the atmosphere. And as you guys were talking about, it's all about narratives, and music is a way to convey a narrative but somewhat subconsciously. We don't even realize its effects until we kind of have goosebumps, and you're like, whoa, this is doing something to me. I don't know what it is, but it's sort of transcending a kind of a typical state. So it's the culture and its fit is synonymous. Music, esports, gaming. It's really the same fans a lot of the time, and it tells different aspects or different perspectives of the experience.
Interesting. You mentioned culture. And as you know, music is a universal language, but we all know that each region has its own music or types of music, notes, etc. So how would cultural music impact storytelling or gaming experience, Ariel?
So I guess I'd put it this way, that esports fans and players of games that they're passionate about, they put all of their energy and their might and their soul into these games that they love. And over time, they find a social connection with others around the world. They have this rich sort of sense of belonging that comes from it, and it validates them. And there's a whole psychological study around, a generation that felt underappreciated, right, by their parents. And, I won't tell the whole story, but this generation ended up making their mark because the thing they loved got the attention that they thought the whole time it deserved. And it was our job taking their stories, taking their competitions, and putting them on display for the world to see. And so I think all of us who were involved in that movement were generally just blown away by the reaction of the players and the reaction of mass media as they started to catch wind of this movement, right? And they would always tell these almost silly stories about, it's amazing, you can make money playing video games, and it became this meme for all of us. But like the players themselves, they had been there for years, and they had been toiling away, and when we gave them these channels and paths to find their passion, take it to the next level, they were excited. So to answer the question, the biggest pressure we feel in creating anything for this market is that we do it justice for those players. And that we do it in a way that's authentic for them. And so when we start thinking about collaborations, the ones that are most successful actually were born through passion as well. And the ones that weren't as successful were obviously inauthentic. And they were essentially just slapping a piece of tape onto the side of a stage, and the gamers can see right through that. So even though the music can be a universal language, authenticity is critical. So when you look at the best partnerships and the best collaborations that Achilles mentioned, right, whether it's Imagine Dragons or maybe Linkin Park this year, and Imagine Dragons I always like to go to because they were playing League way before I met them. And actually Brandon Beck texted me and asked me about Imagine Dragons, and I hadn't really heard of them at that time. And when we met them, they told us they were late for their concerts because they were finishing a game. And you just want to team up with someone who gets it.
Yeah.
Because in the end, music will transcend, and I think music is a great hook for pop culture at large. But it doesn't mean you skip past all the steps of making content for a specific passionate audience. And if you do that successfully, which is not always easy, but if you do that, the core audience will love it. They'll feel insanely gratified by it. And the rest of those concentric circles that go out to infinity in the mass market, they'll pick it up anyway with their, antenna and whatever it is. But the core will always be the one that gets the most excitement and validation from it. Okay. So that's really the core of this whole thing, is that whether it's, a psalm talking about the sounds that amplify tension in a video game, or it's me thinking about the music that can make these dramatic, climactic competition moments on a stage feel even greater at the level of traditional sports or beyond. Okay. It starts with really just like thinking about the audience itself and what is the emotion that they will feel, and did you do your homework and understand the game design? Or if you're a composer of pop culture, like, did you actually play this game? Like, did you ever care about this game before you made a song for a video game event?
Yes.
If you haven't, then, you know, it could be a problem.
Exactly. If I can just complement that,
Yes.
Gamers are very passionate. Let's agree on that. And you have to know how to speak to them. The authenticity that Ariel mentioned is very critical, and very great point in terms of the way that a composer would think about it is it's a blank canvas. You need to think about not only the music, but also the sound effects, all the incorporating elements. But when you think about even the way, let's say Hideo Kojima, when he selects, when he picks a soundtrack for one of his trailers, you know, he always has this reputation of picking the right song for the moment. And that is an art in itself. That is not easily taught.
I do agree. Hideo Kojima's games, every time I hear "The Best Is Yet to Come," I start to tear up. That game
Yes.
music is amazing.
And sometimes he creates his own, like Snake Eater, when he's climbing that ladder for 15 minutes. I always, whenever I'm talking to game designers, you know, Nasser bin Rabahan, I'm always like, he works with me now, so I'm always sending him links. I always send him that stair when the boss is like, big boss is like climbing a set of stairs for like, a ladder for 5 minutes. That's not fun game design. You don't think about, oh, I want to climb stairs and I'm gonna have some fun. But he created an iconic moment because of the music that surrounds it.
Yes.
And it's iconic. Talk to any gamer about that moment. It's a top 10 moment.
Yes, music really has it can create anything from actually simple, basic things. And I'm really glad we all like the same artist. We won't argue here. And it comes to my mind something I've been struggling with for a while, and I would like to ask Mus'ab in that regard. You know, when we talked about cultural music and all of that, I remember when I went to Japan and I was at Square Enix talking about music, etc. I made them listen to a Saudi track, and Mizuta-san, he said he listened to lots of music, but never a Saudi music. So I'm sure if any game development studio here in Saudi would create music, I think they would want to create a Saudi soundtrack, and I think that's a challenge in its own. And I've been there, so I would like to hear your thoughts on this matter.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, authenticity. I really agree with this. Culture sensitivity as well. Like, if we are building a game that targeting different audience than the Arabic audience, then for sure we will not try to touch base on using a deep Saudi music in that game, because the culture, because the audience culture is quite different. So introducing something new or different, it has to be linked with the gameplay itself. It has to be linked with the experience.
Yes.
So if it's adding to the experience and it's making a difference, then for sure it will be a dramatic moment. What we have tried so far, like in one of our games still in their development at the moment, we try to mix between the Saudi music and utilizing some of the Saudi instruments, and made them in the way that it's appealing globally. And I believe we are succeeding in doing this, because the game has a potential to become a global, and for the global audience. So we are thinking always like how we can utilize this and sending a good part of the game to be within the music. And we have seen, I believe, some of the experiences, not from the gaming industry, but from the other advertisement, utilizing some of the Saudi music, like in the last one of the Apple promotion they did last 2 months, I believe. They have utilized one of the part of the they call it الموشحات الأندلسية, which is like 600 years ago. Music came from the region, and they rebuilt it and revive it to be one of their commercial or promotion. Say, by having or saying so in the gaming industry, sometimes we don't need to use a music from the region, maybe from that region, if we are targeting like Western region or we are targeting Eastern region, it should be appeal to that audience. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, basically, I think it depends also on the game itself. If it's based on Saudi culture, if it's based on something can be general. We all agree that music can give great meaning to the gaming experience, and different tones of music and rhythm, etc., can also create different feelings, and the timing can be really important. Selecting the correct type of music also is important. But I want to go back to the basic, in your opinion, Isam, what makes a good musical score or a soundtrack?
Well, really, it ultimately depends on serving the artistic framework that is established. And this is important because you know all the successful composers, they were specifically chosen for a reason. And if we go outside of the realm of video games and we think about film, and all of Christopher Nolan's recent films had Hans Zimmer for a very specific reason.
Yeah.
There's a specific tonality and a specific style that he contributes that when the artist is initially creating the framework of what it is they're trying to create, they need to couple that with the right collaborator to achieve the ultimate end goal. So, and sometimes this happens with me where somebody would come to me and says, could you write a soundtrack for me? And I would tell them I'm not the right person for this. This is something that I would not serve the product that you're trying to build. And you would need to look into a different style of a composer that would be able to serve that purpose. So there's a lot of nuance that goes into the genre that you're targeting, the audience that you're targeting, the tone of the game. Is it tongue-in-cheek? Is it more exciting? I tend to lean more towards the epic and the grandiose. This is a part of my metal background. I just like to make loud noises and make them really efficient and exciting. Yeah. But then you've got the Nobuo Uematsu side where I want tear jerkers. I want people to feel, to emote based on the work that I've done. But again, it goes back to the core design consideration that a game designer or a creator would consider in order to be able to define who is the best person fit for this purpose.
That topic is something I would come back to, but before of that, today I learned something interesting. I do not go into multiplayer games a lot. I always play solo games. And even the multiplayer or the online games I play, I use the keyboard to talk. So I've been listening to the game music or track for all the time. But Achilles told me something really interesting. It's that during tournaments, the players aren't listening to music. So would you tell us more about that?
That is very interesting. I never even thought about that.
See?
Yeah, I mean, it comes for an obvious reason in those contexts is because they're speaking to each other. So if you're listening to music in drop D, effectively, you're not able to hear your teammates be like, get out of the lane, or go do this, or pay attention to this, we're going to run this strategy. So they don't actually play with music whilst in the tournaments for most games. I'm sure there are some titles, kind of maybe like a Street Fighter or something, maybe certain players in those environments have different rules and regulations, but in tight competitive contexts, the likes of ESL or Riot Games and Riot Esports for League of Legends, you would be provided with their headphones and then kind of noise cancellation on top of that. So it was very, these were practices implemented for competitive or integrity measures. So, you couldn't hear other players and so on, or even you couldn't hear the crowd. So recently, I remember an ESL tournament back in Berlin last year, the ESL 1 Major for Dota 2, and it was a velodrome, and usually the boxes around the venue had just these kind of, sheets of glass that you would open and close the booths. And they removed these so there wouldn't be a reflection of the players' screens, or so they couldn't see what the other team was doing. So, yeah, there are certain nuances, but in competitive environments for most of the top esports, they're not listening to music during the competition. They're just listening to the kind of in-game schematics of the players, which, you know, some of those are not so great to listen back to, actually.
Are sound effects turned off as well?
It really depends on the play. Yeah.
There are sound effects, yeah. Yeah, but even with that example, which is an interesting one to point out, in a dramatic environment where everything's moving at the speed of light and the music is picking up and picking up and picking up, when you hit that dramatic point where it's all on the line, all you're hearing is heartbeat, and maybe it's the absence of sound that is creating the drama in that case, right? So when I think about sports in a video game, I actually think it's fitting in a way because they're not feeling anything except the extreme focus that's in their mind, that's being transmitted through these very special headsets that we've all created for them. And the audience at home should be getting that compatible, you know, whatever it is, like sounds and music. But the actual competitors, it almost feels like that is the drama, the absence, the draining away of the blood, right? Like, and everything that goes into that critical moment.
You know, we made it so awesome that I want to try playing without music to see.
It'll feel strange.
It'll give you an additional focus layer for sure.
You know, like there are certain sound effects that you want to hear, you know, that just, it really complements the action that you're taking, you know? So from a competitive environment, it makes perfect sense, you know? But from a standard experience, you want every action that you take with the player, with the character, to be complemented with something that gives weight to the action that you're taking. Again, back to the Mario jump, you know, it's
responsiveness.
Exactly, yes.
That's exactly it. You want to hear that narrator in League of Legends tell you that you have a pentakill, which I've never actually received myself, but it would be an incredible moment in a competitive environment to be like, whoa, I've just done the kind of unimaginable, so to speak.
Interesting. Musab, you wanted to add something?
No, actually, looking at it from like a gamer and being in this moment of spins and focusing on the target, like a competitive. But looking at it from the audience, I believe the audience will enjoy the moment as with the music and with the beat as well. 100%. Like, so it's two sides of the bridge, you know, from the gamer and also from the audience who they are watching the match or being part of it.
I remember reading something regarding really skilled players. They think of the game as something abstract, just rules and ways of overcoming the challenges. To them, it's no longer a story or an environment. I think that also applies to music. And we have little time left. I would like to, since I think at certain point, all of us has participated in creating a certain feeling, a certain type of experience. So I would like to ask about that. I will start with Ariel. If you want to create a certain music for a game or something, first of all, what criteria in which you select the composers for the experience you want to create?
Well, yeah, I think it's an overlay of a few things when you consider collaborations that are successful. One is, again, above all else, it's thinking about the audience that plays the game first. And to some degree, it's to really think through a global footprint of players and what is culturally popular at a given time, right? So Asia drove the culture in music for several years, right? Where it was like a combination of K-pop, sound, a little bit of like hip-hop influence. Now there's a little bit of like a rock element coming through, right, with K-pop, and the whole like choreography of it, and like practicing all these different moves. All of that is critical to take in and think through what's going to work for the audience, and that's the very first thing. So for us, like in the example of Riot Games, before KDA existed, our team, which is insane geniuses in music, the composers at Riot Games are just unbelievable. Christian Link is the showrunner for Arcane. He started out as a composer with our team, and the passion for composition and telling these stories about the lore of the game led him to a 10-year odyssey of creating Arcane, right? From that passion. Okay, so it's really great composers. They're always going around the world visiting players around the world, whether it be through the vessel of our esports events or visiting offices in a global team, and just sampling the sounds of different regions. And from that inspiration led them to divine what was next. And in some very rare instances, gaming could create the new cultural sound movement, right? And so I think K-pop is a great example of it being well established in Asia and it being selected out for KDA and actually introducing it to a lot of Western audience in the same way that Imagine Dragons, working with Riot and with us, a fairly well established Western audience knew them. When I was planning the events in Seoul, Korea, they were concerned, I don't want to start rumors here, but they were concerned at the time that no one knew Imagine Dragons in Asia. And when they came for the event in 2014, we actually introduced them in some ways to Asia, and now they're just mega successful, global tours, etc. So sometimes gaming can lead the charge, but in many cases it's just about being sensitive to the trends and thinking about your audience first, selecting the right type of partners that are passionate about the products and the games, and creating something that's truly authentic and memorable.
So, rule of thumb, create for the audience.
I second this. Creating for the audience, for sure, yani, before anything else.
And Musab, as a game studio owner, I'm sure that you have dealt with sound teams and musicians. So I'm not sure, it's sometimes fairly difficult to convey the requirements, or maybe how would you manage the communication between the teams within the studio, for example, the game designer and the sound creators?
Awesome. Yeah, this is a good question actually, because dealing with an artist from the region they didn't work with a gaming company before is quite difficult, but at the same time it's quite interesting. We haven't worked with Assam yet, but I believe Assam is way advanced. But talking about if we are building something for puzzle genre, for example, or different genres, how to communicate with the artist and with the game design team or game production team is basically starting with a very clear brief. So defining what mood, which genre you are building the game for, and then for sure the audience, their demography and their ages, etc. And then we are using different tools, especially with the remote team. Like if we are working with an artist living in Jeddah or in a different city, there are some tools that can help them to be within the developers, testing their audience, testing their audio and testing their music interactively within the gameplay. So before we ship it, before we go live, we try also to share with them the full GDD game design document, sharing the visuals, the key scenes, like we want in this scene to be more dramatic, in this scene we want some sort of silence moment because we want the player to focus on this and that. And then it's an iterative process, and we have to change and test a lot.
Okay.
I just wanted to say something about this because it really resonated with me, what you're talking about, briefs, and what I think all great partnerships start with trust. And whether it's Steven Spielberg and John Williams, if you ask Spielberg, he'll give 50% credit for Star Wars to John Williams. 50%. This was in the documentary that's on, I think, Netflix right now. So the combination is so much stronger than the individual parts when a partnership is good. And so I think that trust needs to be really strong working with AAA artists or small creators and composers. Either way, the largest are the smallest. It always involves trust. So when you work with an artist like Imagine Dragons, again, is such a great example for me that I like to lean back on. It took a couple of years to build that trust. Before you write music together, before you compose, there's trust that needs to be built so that you can be vulnerable enough to show a demo to somebody and then mold it together, and then it eventually gets its final form, which is more powerful than the individual. That is exciting for me. That is super exciting. And I think all of us on the stage like dream about relationships that are built on and forged on that type of trust.
I do agree.
To have those extraordinary results.
Yes, I do agree. But you know, as people working in the gaming industry, I can imagine what we need. But for someone who's using different platforms to keep engagement of the audience and interest, you're using music for streaming on platform like Twitch. So how would you handle the requirements for such platform when you're either creating the music or selecting the music?
That's a really good question, and I think the answer goes right back to what Ariel said. It's all about the audience. So whilst the format changes slightly, it's still understanding who is watching this Twitch stream and what are they into. And you know, some of the how I viewed streamers, like Twitch streamers in the past, were effectively for me kind of just radio DJs, right? So it's just like, these guys have an audience, they're listening to them talk all day. It's not about the weather, but it's, you know, about a video game or whatever it is now and just chatting. But this audience, this demographic has a particular flavor of music that they're into. And then I would just tap into that with the distribution of whatever record I was promoting at the time. So some really good examples were like Muselk, this was way back, one of the first campaigns that I did, but he was one of those early generation Fortnite influencers. And everyone that was into Fortnite loved that real sad boy hip hop. You know, I'm talking like Trippie Redd, XXXTentacion. It was just really kind of depressive, emo hip hop, but it was really synergetic with the culture at the time. So I just had Muselk, you know, I gave him access to the new Trippie Redd record. It wasn't really a kind of licensing procedure with Twitch at the time. It was just really just kind of like, you have permission to play this. If something happens, we'll support you. And then just gave them access to play the record to their fans, and you know, with the chatbot and so on, just promoting their listeners towards whatever the call to action was at the time. So yeah, and then you know, some of the more kind of rock or metal campaigns that I worked on, there was a really big music festival that I did marketing for, which had, you know, the likes of Baby Metal and like The Offspring, etc., kind of doing, you know, it was an iconic festival. And then I went, okay, so let's look into some audiences or some streamers that had more mature audiences. So I was looking at some of the FPS titles and so on, and then was just playing, you know, streamers, or at the time had paid or worked with ESL to broadcast the Ubisoft Rainbow Six Championship at PAX in Melbourne. And again, it was one of those very touch and go situations of licensing, but all worked out. So yeah, the answer is what Ariel said before. Understand your audience, give them what they want.
So it's about developing or creating for the audience and about trust. Isam, I have a difficult question for you, and you have to answer in less than in 1 minute. So you capture the requirement, or you get the requirement from the person who wants you to create music for them. So how would you capture all the requirements and recreate the feeling they had in mind? So
it's a bit of self-imposition, where you kind of try to impose your own creative vision in terms of the music and try to slot your personality in there. Because at the end of the day, what is art? It's you. It's your expression that is being represented in that specific product. So, and it's always a collaboration, and you just want to get to the end product for the end user that satisfies the expectations of the creative person, but also that adds your own unique spin, adds your own personality into the product. But it has to serve the product at the end of the day. You can't impose a certain style just because you want to put your name on it, but having that understanding of the wider or the holistic vision of what the product needs to be in the addressable market, and then finding your place within that and giving it your all.
Okay, so again, it all goes back to what the audience wants and the trust between the experience owner and the composer. So I think we only have 30 minutes. I would like to use that to thank you all. It has been a really interesting and informative session, and I would also extend my thanks to the XP Music team. Thank you for having us, and we really enjoyed our time. Thank you also for coming.
Thank you.